Welcome back. In this video, we will discuss several causal scenarios for epigenetic markers in Mendelian randomization. We already talked about how DNA methylation can be either upstream or downstream of disease phenotypes. That means we can consider it either an exposure or an outcome in our analysis. Today, I will also introduce the third possibility that's largely informed by modern biological knowledge. And that's a paradigm in which DNA methylation, or really any other epigenetic change, can mediate the relationship between two other factors. So we will go through all these scenarios today, and we will use examples from two published papers that involve DNA methylation, smoking, and various disease traits. I have included links on this slide so you can follow along as you wish or take a look at it later. Most figures in this video come from these papers unless cited otherwise. I also wanted to include a little bonus scenario, and that's inspired by a question that I sometimes get. Well, we know epigenetic markers can be exposures, they can be outcomes, maybe they can be mediators, but can they also be instruments? And we'll discuss that possibility at the end of the video. First, let's revisit this diagram from the previous video. This is a classic Mendelian randomization setup. Let's say we observed a significant association between methylation at a specific locus. For example, we can talk about a gene called CPT1A and a phenotype. Here, let's talk about obesity. CPT1A happens to be a real epigenetic finding that showed up in a lot of obesity studies, but we're not sure if it's causal or purely observational. So what do? Well, first we estimate the causal effect of exposure, which is DNA methylation, on obesity, which is the outcome. So we choose proper instruments for that CPT1A locus by regressing its methylation status on the neighboring SNPs, and then choose one or maybe choose a few and use two-stage least squared regression to estimate the effect of the instrumental variable on the outcome of obesity. For now, let's just say that we have good reasons to believe that our analytic assumptions are satisfied and those estimates come out valid. In other words, they're not biased. But we know that the reverse direction of association, where obesity influences methylation rather than vice versa, is equally plausible because the epigenome is dynamic. In fact, that's what we see in many studies, that the health phenotype itself, the disease state itself, can change the epigenome rather than the epigenome influencing the phenotype. So we can do the Mendelian randomization analysis in another direction. Now, our exposure is the obesity trait and methylation is the outcome. So we need a different instrument that can be used as a proxy for obesity. Different exposure, different instrument. We then do our usual analysis the same way we did it in the opposite direction and obtain the causal estimates of effect of the phenotype on methylation. In this case, the causal effect of obesity on CPT1A methylation. When we do those two sets of analyses, we have several possible outcomes. In the first analysis, we already know that our instrumental variable is associated with methylation, well, because otherwise it wouldn't be our instrumental variable. If it's also associated with obesity, then we have evidence supporting our theory that epigenetic changes drive changes in phenotype. The same thing can happen in the reverse direction, right? We already know that our instrumental variable Z2 here, because it's a different instrumental variable, is associated with obesity, but if it is also associated with methylation, we can say that the phenotype is causing changes in the epigenome, particularly the methylome. Of course, it is also possible that you end up with evidence of causal effects in both directions. In that case, you can do a couple of things. You can look to see which effect is stronger, but perhaps what you really need to do is think about your biology some more and maybe think of other reasons that could explain the observed relationship. And definitely check your Mendelian randomization assumptions, which is something you should do anyway, but especially in a situation like that. This actually would be a good reason to use more than one instrument, and by that I mean multiple SNPs, to better understand what's going on. Finally, for the sake of completeness, I will add this possibility. that you may see no evidence of causal effects in either direction, which is totally possible, and it happens a lot, either because there is no effect, or because you did not have the power to see it, or purely due to chance. Here on the left, we have a diagram of standard Mendelian randomization, and the numbers 1, 2, 3 here denote the 3 assumptions. You have met those assumptions many times by now in this course, and on the right, we have an adaptation of this to situations where bidirectional relationship is possible, which would include any epigenetic study. Note here that the confounders are the same in the two scenarios, but the instrumental variables are different depending on what you consider exposure and what you consider outcome. Let's go through a recent example of a bidirectional study. This was a large-scale consortium study of DNA methylation at blood pressure, and it included almost 17,000 individuals, all of whom had epigenome-wide data on DNA methylation quantified by the Illumina 450K array. Again, that's the most common array you'll encounter in literature. First, they ran an epigenome-wide study of several blood pressure traits, and that means they took all 450-some thousand CpGs that were on the array and tested them for association with a phenotype. 13 of these 450,000 were indeed significantly and reproducibly associated, and those were the ones that were carried forward to the next phase, which was the Mendelian randomization study. They could not do that on all 17,000 people, unfortunately, because not all of them had SNP data, which is required for you to have an instrumental variable. But turns out that a good subset of them did, about 4,500. And so they tested causal effects in both directions, from epigenetics to blood pressure and vice versa. They used the inverse variance methods for all SNPs except for those that had pleiotropic effects, and for those they used the Egger test, which is great in that situation, but remember, it gives you less statistical power. Here are a few results from their analyses. You can see in this table that they used multiple instruments, multiple SNPs per each CpG site. Again, a CpG site is your methylation locus. And they estimated causal effects and p-values in both directions. For the sake of space, I only included their top findings here, but you can follow the link in the header to see the entire table. If they knew that there are pleiotropic effects for a given CpG, they did not include the p-values, and you can see that in the first row in the forward direction. Additionally, for some CpGs, they were only able to test one or the other direction because there simply wasn't a good instrumental variable, and that's what you see here in row 3. Overall, they established that at one of the 13 loci, methylation was influencing blood pressure, but at 3 of them, blood pressure was actually influencing methylation. At one of those loci, the one in row 2, they had evidence of causal effects in both directions, but they concluded that the effect of the phenotype was stronger based on a lower p-value. As we know, p-values have many issues with interpretation, so please take that conclusion with a grain of salt. Incidentally, that bidirectional CpG is in the CPT1A gene, so you can see why I'm so obsessed with it. It shows up for a lot of cardiometabolic phenotypes. So far, I've showed you a way of addressing this issue of reverse causality, which is very common in a lot of observational studies, but particularly in epigenetics. If you observe an association and you're not sure which way the causal effect goes, just test it both ways, as long as you have 2 valid instrumental variables. As our example shows, you can use the usual methods and assumptions of Mendelian randomization. This is not at all unique to epigenetics. It's just that in epigenetic studies, the phenotype can influence the epigenome just as often, if not more often, than the opposite effect. So the need for this bidirectional approach is especially strong. Now let's consider another possibility. What if instead of simply considering epigenetic processes as either upstream or downstream of our phenotype, we thought of them as the causal link between the exposure and the outcome? In other words, can some environmental factor, like smoking, affect the risk of disease later through epigenetic mechanisms. Certainly, it's a very appealing hypothesis from an etiologic standpoint, from a common sense standpoint. And the good news is that we have a method called two-step Mendelian randomization that can test that very scenario. Here, I kind of have to include this note that should hopefully clarify some of the nomenclature. We just talked about bidirectional Mendelian randomization. And previously, Stephen taught you the two-stage least squares method. And now we will talk about two-step MR. So it's a lot of twos, twos, twos. It all gets very confusing, but please remember those are all different methods. I know people should have probably been more creative in naming those, but we're math geeks. We're creative when it comes to math, but maybe not when it comes to words. Please make sure that you understand the difference between those concepts on the slide, and feel free to reach out to one of us if it's still kind of muddled. So, two-step Mendelian randomization. The basic idea here is pretty simple. In the first step, you use an instrumental variable for your exposure, let's say smoking, and you check to see if it's causally affecting methylation. And that can be done in separate samples. If there is no causal relationship at that stage, you can move on because there's no evidence that your exposure has epigenetic effects, so epigenetics cannot be a mediator. If there is a causal effect, you go to step 2. And again, those can be done in different data sets. In that step, you can choose another instrumental variable. This time, it'll be an MEQTL because you're using it as a proxy for methylation, and you test if methylation is affecting your outcome. This method was proposed by Professor Caroline Relton and George Davies-Smith, and I have linked to the paper on the slide if you're curious about the more technical derivations. The fact that I mentioned twice already that step 1 and step 2 can be done in different samples is very important. It makes your life a lot easier, but it also complicates your interpretation. Let's take a look. Let's go through this example that's linked in the header. This was a smaller study. It looked at the relationship between smoking, DNA methylation, and various inflammatory outcomes in an African American population. Previously, these investigators had already identified a few methylation loci that were associated with smoking. And in this analysis, they focused on 2 of them that are listed on the slide. The investigators hypothesized that smoking conferred changes on the epigenome, and these epigenetic changes resulted in inflammatory perturbations. Now, from a purely statistical perspective, I need to offer this caveat, and they could have considered a causal relationship in the opposite direction, from inflammation to methylation to smoking, but it just makes less sense. So that's why the study was designed the way it was. In step 1, we're testing whether our exposure, in this case smoking, causes changes in methylation in those candidate regions. Here we're looking at one locus in F2RL3 and a bunch of instrumental variables that previous studies had identified to be good proxies for smoking. They looked at them individually and then jointly as a genetic risk score. That's what you see in the last row, GRS, genetic risk score. And you can infer from this table that for most of them, the relationship is robust and negative. So what does that mean? Genetically predicted smoking causes less methylation at those loci. In step 2, they chose MEQTL instruments in the regions where they had candidate methylation loci, and they tested whether genetically predicted methylation causes changes in inflammation, also using both individual variables and the genetic risk scores. We see a mixed bag here, mostly null for this particular inflammation marker, but negative for others that are not shown here but can be seen in the original paper. And again, the link can be found in the slide deck. So, from step 1, we know that smoking decreases DNA methylation in this particular region. And from step 2, we know that DNA methylation decreases inflammation. So with this double negative, we end up with a paradigm in which smoking increases inflammation. And that insight was achieved using the 2-step Mendelian randomization method. So far, we have developed the methodological toolbox to look at epigenetic markers, particularly DNA methylation, as being causes of phenotypes, consequences of phenotypes, or mediators of associations between the environment and the phenotypes, or phenotypes and the environment. Can go either way. The approaches that are listed on this slide are the up-to-date, cutting-edge approaches to answer those questions, and they have successfully been used in dozens of epigenetic studies. The final scenario I would like to discuss today pertains to a question that I mentioned already. There seems to be a certain temptation to consider epigenetic markers as instrumental variables instead of SNPs. Usually that happens because an investigator has epigenetic data but no genotype data. And they think, well, the epigenome is kind of close to the genome, so do I really need SNPs? My answer is yes, you do. The reason SNPs work as instrumental variables is because they're randomly allocated at conception. So your confounders, measured confounders, unmeasured confounders, would be equally distributed across comparison groups. CpGs, unlike SNPs, are not randomly allocated at conception. And in fact, we already know that in the case of methylation, they're actually erased early on and accumulate with environmental influences throughout life. And of course, those environmental influences are very likely to be related to confounding variables. And so you would end up with a biased estimate. The only sort of exception to this is the case when you have complete overlap between a CpG and a SNP site. And in that case, it's really more of a genetic effect rather than an epigenetic effect. So just consider your SNP as you normally would, a regular genetic instrumental variable. To sum up this video, today we learned how epigenetic data can be incorporated in the Mendelian randomization setup. We have talked about bidirectional randomization, bidirectional Mendelian randomization rather, to address the issue of reverse causation. And we have seen how this simple two-step approach can be used to test whether epigenetic mechanisms can mediate the relationship between two traits or between exposure and disease. We also learned why most epigenetic markers are not likely to make good instrumental variables. And speaking of what makes a good instrumental variable, in our next video, we will briefly review Mendelian randomization assumptions and see how they can play out when epigenetic data are involved. Thank you for watching.